Okay.
So you ready for me, Ann?
Okay, you are live and recording.
Yes, we
Okay,
are.
very good. So this is Steve Leith. Steve Willard is with us. He's committee chair, but with limited connectivity, he's let me kick it off. And Scott Stanley will take over later in the meeting, perhaps, depending how long it goes. So on behalf of Steve and Scott, I'm welcoming everyone to today's meeting of the Committee on Oversight. And first order of business, Ann, will you please call the roll?
Yes, I will. Please say here when I call your name. First committee members, Roger Beachy. Vicki Chandler.
Here.
Thank you. Steve Lee.
Here.
Scott Stanley.
Here.
Thank you. Kayvon Stassen. Okay. Wanda Ward. Stephen Willard.
Here.
And I do see that we have other board members. Suresh Babu.
Here.
Thank you. Matt Malkin.
Here.
Thank you. Vic McCrary.
Here.
Beverly Watford.
Here.
Okay, I show that. Are there any other board members I do not see who are on the call? Okay, thank you. Back to you, Steve.
All right, thanks, Ann. Our NSB liaisons are Ann Bushmiller, who you just heard from, obviously, Portia Flowers and Alexander Serchel, and our executive secretary is Veronica Shelley. So with that, we'll move into our agenda. First item will be the NSF's chief financial officer who's going to present highlights of the most recent CFO report and respond to any of our questions. The report is in our diligent book for this meeting at tab 1.1. In addition, we had hoped to hear a presentation on the results of the pilot to improve reviewer training, which is in response to the board's 2021 statement and resolution to improve peer reviews and address unconscious biases. But it's actually still being prepared, so we'll have to look forward to getting it in the future at our next meeting. In the meantime, we're going to take the remainder of our meeting time today to discuss future merit review digests and overviews. So our speaker this morning is Janice Coughlin-Peaster, who is NSF's Chief Financial Officer, as well as our Performance Improvement Officer. She's going to provide an update to the committee on agency finance and performance issues from our last quarter. As I mentioned, Janice's written CFO report is available in tab 1.1 of our diligent board book. The Office of Budget, Finance, and Award Management prepares these reports approximately in sync with the NSB meetings, but because the Committee on Oversight, like most board committees, does not meet during the in-person meeting days, we'll expect to receive this report the first Committee of Oversight meeting that follows an NSB meeting. So Janice, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. So I really just have two quick updates to my written report. So first up, the year-end close is upon us. We have 10 days left in the federal fiscal year. So we continue processing our awards, and we expect it to be another milestone year for both our contracts and financial assistance awards. And we continue to monitor the agency's progress against various targets, such as our EPSCoR target and small business requirements. And then the other key activity right now is the financial statement audit work. So we actually start working with our Office of Inspector General partners and their independent auditor on the financial statement audit well in advance of the end of the fiscal year to ensure that we can meet government-wide deadlines. We expect to be publishing the financial statement and our agency financial report on time, which is November 15th of this year. So like I said, we're meeting our timelines and deliverables, so we're in good shape. And that's all I have to report. I'm happy to take any questions you may have on the written report or. Thank you.
Any questions? Well, you're keeping us ahead of schedule. That's always good.
That's the way to be at the end of the year. Absolutely ahead of schedule.
And if anybody gets any questions in the meantime, they can weigh in on them. So next, we're going to turn to our continued discussion of the future merit review digest and NSB overviews. At our March meeting, the Office Integrative Activities gave a presentation on the fiscal year 2021 merit review digest. In April, we approved the overview and began to consider the future of these documents. So now we'll explore the topic further. Most recent digest is in tab 1.2 of the diligent book, and tab 1.3 is an excerpt from the digest listing, the tables for easy reference for you. And then tab 1.4 is the March memo from NSF about potentially making the overview a separate board document from the actual digest. The FY 2019 digest was published in January 2021. And then the 2020 digest was published in March 2022. And the FY 21 digest was published in July 23. The trend here is not necessarily great. As you can see, the digests keep getting published later each year with a longer gap. So we're trying to publish the 2022 digest here, but it's September and we still don't have a draft. So this is really starting to stretch out. So we're trying to ask politely here, when does NSF estimate it will provide the Committee on Oversight with the draft 2022 digest? We basically agree with OIA that the document is most useful when the data are fresh. And the committee will prioritize the task of reviewing it and getting it turned around with an accompanying overview as soon as we receive it. Do we have any information on that, Ann, that you know of? Does anybody know of it?
Right. No, I guess if anybody from OIA could help us by just saying, when's an estimate, where is it in the pipeline, that would be that'd be helpful.
It would be.
Sure, I can give a brief update. So
Thanks.
thank you for going through sort of the timeline of the previous availability of previous digests. As you note, that it has been stretching longer and longer,
Right.
which is certainly one of the reasons why we have advocated looking at some alternatives. And one of the key things that we've done between the 20 digest and the 2021 digest is really narrow and focus in on the key statistics of interest based on what the questions that were commonly asked, what we hear from the community. They're looking, kind of the information that the community tells us is of interest, things that frequently come up, obviously, in our conversations with the National Science Board and the Committee on Oversight. So we are working on the 22 dashboard or digest right now. We've compiled the data and we're doing the QA process for the underlying data right now. It is always my hope that it will go smoothly. As you may recall, last year we opted to delay the publication and preparation of the digest in order to take advantage of the improvements in the demographic data that we were seeing as a result of some of NSF's efforts to improve collection of demographic data from PIs. I believe that was the right decision to make because we were able to provide a much more complete picture of the community as a result. And we're seeing the benefits now in this most recent pulling of the data and QAing of the data. So, I do hope it is something that we will see sooner rather than later.
Well, make sure I'm not on mute here. Well, that's a big help. Thanks for, jumping in there and giving us updates. So based on those comments and, some other discussions, we think the committee can provide feedback to NSF and prepare the draft overview, hopefully in 6 weeks or less. Then NSB needs to approve the overview. We usually bring it to the board at one of the quarterly meetings, although I think Steve's idea is to maintain a timely schedule, we might just seek the board's approval electronically to keep things moving along. So opening it up for discussion, what do we think of as a tentative schedule for producing the 2023 digest? Any comments on that? Maybe go back to Eric. I don't know. Do you think it'll be the same time frame, or will be a little more efficient with the changes and stuff you've made and everything, or what do you think?
So yes, our hope is that we have actually already started at the same time that we're working on the 22 digest right now. we already have some efforts underway related to the 23 digest.
Oh, wow, great.
In part, really to help our internal operations so that we can pull the statistics, clean the data, QA them, prepare the tables. That's a lot of behind the scenes and not very glamorous work that we've been investing in the last really 6 months or so to try and improve how this process works. But just as a reminder, I think one of the idea that we had put forward in that previous memo is that we decouple sort of the production of the statistics from the board's careful consideration of the policy interpretation of those statistics. In a nutshell, that's essentially what we recommended. And that is certainly an opportunity to further accelerate our ability to release the statistics and get those out in the hands of the community much more quickly, and sort of decouple the statistics production from the analysis, the policy considerations that may emerge from those.
Okay. I think Steve and I think documents are stronger when the digest with the data and the board's overview either come up together, or at least similarly. So we'll try and move quickly on our part, but we can revisit all this too when the Merit Review Commission completes its report. Committee on Oversight's ready to figure out what's feasible, and as we go forward. But that makes sense. So now switching gears a little bit, in some of the earlier committee discussions, members made suggestions to consider adding data sets that are of emerging importance. Now we can discuss a few ideas here. First, it might be useful to include a table displaying the categories of broader impacts as specified in proposals. Congress provided broader impact categories in its competes legislation. And those categories and are in the public guide for our proposers, and the data might be useful in tracking how the agency is actually implementing directives in the legislation, including our CHIPS Plus Science Act. So, and then second, a table displaying the average number of months of budgeted stipend support for graduate students and postdoc researchers per directorate each year could be kind of useful in assessing NSF's strategy to support the STEM workforce of the future. And the third idea we had was to include information about the number of proposals each year that are returned without review because they fail to separately describe the broader impacts portion of the project. And this would give us information about community awareness and understanding of the criterion and implementation of the criterion. So those are some ideas, but we're hoping the Committee on Oversight, other board members might have some other ideas. Alicia, you might want to comment too, but I'm going to open the floor back up for that. Well, it's a quiet group this morning.
I'll leap in. I was looking for the button.
Okay, good.
I just wanted to say the first one on reporting on the different broader impacts categories, that's not a would be nice. We have to do that. That was outlined in the legislation. So
that's a good point. So we need to mark it down as such, Scott, because that's a really good point. Anyone else have comments, thoughts?
Stephen, I'm not in your committee, but I just was looking at the previous digest. It came, 2021 came in June 2023, correct? So if you use the same process flow, we should get it in 2024. I was wondering, what are the steps involved in creating, where is the biggest bottleneck? Do we know that? I'll stop.
I'm gonna let Eric or someone take that on because they prepare the report. We don't necessarily prepare that. We do the overview. So any of the NSF staff that could help us on it, that'd be good.
And I'll actually let Alicia kick us off.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so I think Eric already addressed this, that part of for FY21 was being able to take advantage of the fact that the demographic data that was collected on individuals was improved. And so we had to go back through everything and redo all the analytics and whatnot. So it's not so much, NSF has a lot of different data systems, budgetary data systems, administrative data systems, and so on, that we're trying to, at different times look at. And as Erica said, we have this quality assurance process that we're going through to make sure that decisions that were made when data were pulled are consistent with the questions and the guidance that we've gotten from you all, and also past versions of the Merit Review Digest and so on. So there's a lot to this. It's not just let's open up our books and show you the data and then write an overview. There's a lot to this process. And as Erica said, we've already started on, for FY22 and 23, these are things that we've made improvements. Now we can really take advantage of those. We're in the process of doing that quality assurance part on the FY22 data, and then FY23, we're moving along as we close out this particular year. But I wanted to take just a minute to talk about where we have been putting additional efforts in terms of making data transparent that, in my opinion, the digest isn't taking advantage of. And so we have already recommended to the committee that consideration of utilizing things like NSF by the numbers, some of the dashboards that we're going to be building to provide transparency in meeting the EPSCoR obligation goal, being able to give greater transparency into our support for MSIs and emerging research institutions. Those sorts of things are where we can update the data every day. You can get up to the minute data available, whereas the digest is a PDF that we put out once a year, and it's static, and it has some limitations based on what we decided to do at that particular point in time. So we have proposed to the committee, at least a year ago we did, that there are some opportunities, because we're making investments in these transparent dashboards, to think about whether the digest could be much more about analyzing two particular questions, Steve, much to the ideas you brought up already, and not make the digest about all of the data availability, but rather asking interesting questions and then providing an analysis as part of the digest.
Thank you.
Well, that's great. That helps a lot. Erica, did you want to add anything, or are you good with that?
No, that's excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah, I think that helps us all gain some perspective. What about this idea that's come up about adding demographic information on program officers and reviewers, where they're from, home institutions, type of institutions, these kinds of things? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Good morning, everyone. Hey, Steve, thanks for leading this, and everybody.
Yeah.
I'll give you some just anecdotal things that I'm hearing from around the communities, both what I would say, both minority and majority institutions. And that is, if NSF, and I think they have done this, but do it more, can be either transparent about that in terms of the reviewers and the reviewer pool, or at least actively manage to make sure that the reviewer pool is diverse on many angles. So I'm not just talking race and gender, but I'm talking small school versus big school, R1 versus M2 class Carnegie designation. I've heard from a number of PIs, particularly in, say, the land-grant institutions, particularly those in the Midwest and other places, are concerned about the reviewer pool. And we do know, because we've had these discussions before, that people bring certain lenses to the review, and so if you're University of North Dakota, you may get somewhat of a discount unintentionally, but it does happen, versus somebody, for example, from the University of Maryland. So I think the more that there is transparency in that process to folks, or, for example, the other side that has been, and DOD does use this, is, for example, they do not have institutional affiliation, for example, in the review of some of their proposals, to try to remove any sort of academic bias.
Okay, thanks, Vic. Beverly, you did have your hand up. Do you still have something, or did Vic hit it or something?
Vic said pretty much everything I thought about saying.
Okay, wow, you guys are kindred spirits today. All right, well, thanks. I may have missed that earlier too. You know what, Scott? I'm thinking, because I'm going to have to switch devices and head to the airport here in a minute. I might switch the rest of the discussion to you, Scott, if that's okay, even though I'll still be on.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Steve, for taking the org.
Oh, you're certainly welcome. All right, this is a good team effort today.
Okay, just a reminder that everything raised today will be documented in a memo for continued consideration. On that note, yeah, it looks like we're really close to the end of the agenda anyway, Steve. Am I missing anything, Ann, or?
No,
I was just thinking,
think
Scott, if there is any more discussion or stuff,
Yeah.
you can handle it, but maybe we're done.
Yep, this is just
Not-
an opportunity for the committee members and any board members to share ideas they've had for information that could be displayed in the digest versus the digital databases where so much information does reside already. What are the highlights? What are things that are of interest to our stakeholders right now?
Yeah, I think that was a great point by Alicia, that so much of that is available real time as opposed to waiting for the once a year event of the publication of the actual PDF. So thank you for that.
One kudo, and this is to you, Alicia, and also Ponch. You mentioned this earlier, and I know it's going to take some time, but Ponch has kind of stood up this kind of information systems part, because we do know when we were yesterday at OSTP, they were asking us some questions about awards, and particularly as the TIP directorate starts making awards and going forward in its infancy, how do we keep all this data and everything? And as we explain to them, if we go retrospective, it's very, very hard for us to get all of that data at a fingertip. And so, we have to scrape PDFs and do things like that. And so Ponch, I know what he's trying to be able to do, as he had said when he came in the office, is I want to be able to sit in front of a member of Congress, have a pad and say, okay, you're from Kansas. This is all the awards we have. These are the sub awards. These are the awards we've made to small businesses. These are the award we made to small schools. All of these things. And right now that's just not possible. But I will say, long as we, from an oversight point of view, can continue to encourage the foundation to do this and to provide both Alicia and other folks, what are the kind of inputs and things that we should be measured? Because particularly at TIP is an economic development program, as we discussed, you were there, Suresh, yesterday. And so some of the metrics and outcomes we look at are going to be very, very different than what we've had in the traditional directorates. And we want TIP to succeed. So however we can provide those inputs to you, Alicia, and by the way, please feel free to reach out to us and say, look, what are the things you see in your own spaces, particularly that may be different from what we've done conventionally, so that we can be more agile and effective.
So thank you, Vic. One thing I just want to piggyback onto this, the drivers for a lot of our work, especially in trying to consider where to put our time and effort and staff, and now systems in place to explore particular questions of interest. And I think having some priority, some perspective on the priority to those questions is very helpful to us. So for example, in this discussion here, I think it's great to open it up and provide members the opportunity to say, hey, I'm interested in this, I'm curious about this, and so on. But without a set of then culminating priorities to that list, it's very difficult for us to go back and say, well, where should we spend our time? We heard someone say that they're interested in understanding what types of broader impacts do PIs select for their proposals. Well, if we had those data, what is the question we're trying to answer? Is it like, great, we know that the majority of proposals select broadening participation as the broader impact of choice. We know this already. So what question are we trying to answer if we look at those data regularly? So I just would like the committee, beyond surfacing what they're curious in, how is it that we can put some priority to these questions and articulate those questions?
If I could leap in on that, we're required to report not only what the most frequent broader participation area is, but also on all the individual subtopics, if you will. So beyond broader participation, economic impact, military applications, obviously the geographic impacts, all of that. So we do need the tabulation of that. And I think it's pretty prescribed in the, again, in the legislation that we will be reporting on that. So that's what we need to do.
So let me pose one issue with quantifying, just counting up things. So the easiest way in which to provide those data would be to ask PIs in their proposals to check a box. That's the very easy way to do this. What's your broader impact? Which category does it fit into? And if it doesn't fit into any of the 10 that the PAPG already prescribes, then there's another category, and then they could write out maybe this is what we want. However, my guess is that people will check every box. There will be people who will check every box because they will think that that will get their proposal funded. So we have to go to the question of interest, not just necessarily reporting this based on what people feel like their work is related to, but really if we find out that very few proposals are focused on economic development, does that help us answer a question or do something differently inside the foundation to encourage more economic development? Is that what we're trying to figure out? So those are the things that I'd love for us to spend time on, because that would help us understand that if we're going to go about reporting things, that it's meaningful reporting, not just demand characteristics of the PIs in hopes that they will get funded.
Alicia, let me just add on to that. And don't answer this now, but it's something for us to consider. It might be something where we take a bunch of board members and go to Ted Montana's, because I've always found that spirits elicit new ideas. Is that, one is with the influx of proposals that you have, particularly on a $100,000 proposal versus, say, a $3 million proposal, given that you don't have an infinite source of program officers there, what is the return on investment, in terms of monitoring the proposals, and so $100,000 proposal, everybody checks the boxes. Is that worth the time? Because you don't have unlimited bandwidth there. Then the other part of that is, how do we make sure the institutions, because traditionally research proposals coming in, the institutions really don't do that much oversight beside financial compliance. They pretty much leave it up to the PIs, and then they put the progress reports, which, by the way, the sponsored office programs don't see, because the PIs put those directly. They don't come through the VPRs. And so is there a new paradigm? And again, I'm kind of extending a conversation we had yesterday with OSTP. How do we do some things differently, given that this is economic development to some extent, given that there's a lot of issues from both politicians of how we grow this regional innovation in this new experiment, and how do we operate within NSF? I mean, do we say a threshold of below $500,000? Okay, fine. Even though we do ask those questions, and I like what you offered, but do we have or require some more rigorous both program management at NSF, but also required to say, if you're going to get this institution, we require you, for example, like what DOD does, to have at least annual program reviews inside. And here are some criteria we'd like you to take a look at, because we want to make sure this investment is happening, because economic development, investment, and outcomes are very different from research, in the sense that at the end of research of 5 years, you're going to get a report, you might have some publications, you might have a few patents. But at the end of 5 years for economic development, those outcomes are very different and might require a little bit more hands-on. Just something to think about.
Yeah, I don't think to get to our desired endpoint that we'll just rely on what the proposers are putting in there. We're going to have to do a brush and verify that, okay, this is meaningful, put a threshold on it, however you want to do it. But
Right.
yeah, I agree. That's a
I mean, for
temptation
example,
that, oh, it's going to be wonderful. It's going to solve all the problems. But, yeah.
here's the biggest fear I think some of us on the board had, and I know Alicia, you'll make sure it doesn't happen, but we don't want the IREs or what we do to become just hyped up ERCs, okay? And at the same time, we'd like something like a Hellmeyer criteria that people have to kind of adhere to in terms when they get these type of proposals.
Well, I'm sure we're going to continue hashing this out on the Merit Review Committee in even more detail. So thank you for those inputs. Are there any other issues anyone would like to raise? If that's it, thank you for the committee members and the other board members who joined us today. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, October 18th, where we'll hear the results of NSF's pilot program on training to improve peer review and address unconscious bias in the merit review process. Thanks again, and unless I hear anything else, that should conclude this morning's meeting of the Committee on Oversight at 8:04.
All right. Thank you very much.